There we go.
Oh my God, it always has this.
We have coffee. Here we are.
Okay, here we are. I am Karin Mindermann, and I've been working in Trelleborg for the last 3 to 4 years, and I'm currently a marketing director in our anti-vibration systems unit. And I'm joined here with my wonderful podcast co-host, Natasha Haddon. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining me, because as you know, we're doing this within the Women Influencer campaign and platform within Trelleborg. And within this one, we're trying to bring together, different women that are influencing within not just manufacturing industry, where I come from, but also other industries. And I think this is where it's going to be quite interesting where the conversation takes us.
Very happy to be speaking to you and also running the podcast with you today and having this conversation about a very, very important and interesting topic. I've been at Google now for the past 4.5 years over in Dublin. And this week, my role changed. I went from being an individual contributor with my most recent promotion to a sales leader amongst our so-called GCS sales teams over here in Dublin, and will, as of now, have 13 reportees reporting into me. So it's all a big position of change, but I think a very good launch pad for this conversation today.
When you and I are sharing, we come from somewhat different fields. You know, you have been in sales for 4.5 years. I've really been most of my life coming in and out of marketing. And now, what is marketing? We could also speak about, because it's also a little bit demystified. But luckily, you working at Google plays a very, very heavy role in marketing. And that's also, if I understand correctly, has been the area where you have been acting in. So where do we come together? How do marketing and sales and working with customers directly or indirectly, what would be, you say, some of the key crossovers that you've seen working in sales with, let's say, marketing or with customers? What are some of the key focus areas for you when you kind of look at the crossovers?
You know, it's a fascinating topic, because I think at the end of the day, what it boils down to between sales and marketing, and also going back to your questions, what you and your industry and my industry have in common, it boils down to what we're doing right now, human conversations and understanding what my opposing person would like to reach. So in a sense, you know, for the past 4.5 years, I've been understanding what my business partners, my clients are hoping to achieve personally, but also professionally, and helping them the best way possible via the marketing platform, Google Ads, of course. You know, we're comparing that with sales and marketing. There's just that key to understanding the psychology behind the wants and wishes of the individual, but also the project or the product you're trying to broadcast. So really, I think when you and I were chit-chatting about this podcast, what seems quite a while ago in a cafe, it was something we both termed the human effect, that really ties all the industries together. If we're being honest, if you took away the human effect of us two knowing each other, our two industries have, or our two positions, not our two industries, have very little crossover. But it's that moment of realizing, hey, you know, there's that commonality that we're both facing, pretty similar daily challenges, pretty similar, you know, cycles of learning in and amongst very different industries, and in and amongst a very broad topic of women in both of these industries as well. So I think it's making those connections, but also understanding that those connections are going to be easier when the person you're interacting with or the group you're interacting with has that same basic understanding of it's humans working together.
Yeah. You know, I think it's quite interesting what you're raising. I mean, where you work in a large tech company or me in an industrial company, of course, where we're coming together, Google is still today a large monopoly at this stage, 2023, in search engine, if I put it this way. And of course, our companies, but also the other industrial, we are finding our customers when they're ready to buy on Google. So we do work with you or with your peers to kind of decide on our online strategies. But what I find quite interesting, because you are within the sales organization in Google, one bridge that we haven't done very well, or it's this almost like a myth between marketing and sales, is how do you create this bridge? Because Well, if you think in back to school, you have the sales funnel or the customer journey, and you have on top, you're trying to create the leads, and that's a strong marketing push. And then you have, let's close the deal, and it gets down to sales. And in the middle, there's different touch points, different pains and different needs and different ways how we're communicating. But there has to be a very strong back and forth internally, right? Well, I might not be working with you, but I do have to work with my sales colleagues constantly because they're the ones that are speaking to the customers directly. I just see a customer persona online. I don't necessarily speak to the person on the other end. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think I agree. It is different. And I think in the most classic structures, you would have that separation. And for sure, of course, Google has their own marketing teams, and I naturally sit in the sales team. But there's a bit of that crossover because essentially what I'm selling is marketing for our clients, right? So the actual product I'm selling is marketing, or that we are selling as a team. And then throughout, you mentioned the funnel from school, throughout obviously a sales funnel. So within that role, there is that interaction. But I agree, of course, naturally speaking, they're very two separate things. And for me, it's then also understanding, right, I'm speaking to the marketing team on client sides and kind of reverse engineering the link you just spoke about on your daily, but at the end of the day, the same thing. And I think that then just boils down to, when we're talking about that human effect, one element that, again, we're doing here is the effective communication. And the link between either sales or marketing or whichever two departments and whichever two, client and company relationships, that's just going to be so key when it comes to the correct amount of listening, the correct amount of information. And also, I think a very, very key point, the agility to adapt, right? Like you and I, of course, I think this is the best example. Of course, we had a conversation about what we were going to talk about, but at the end of the day, we're allowing the conversation to go any which way. And there's that natural element, I think, in all interactions. I'm sure as well when you're the ones working with the sales teams on the other side, understanding, I think they'll say this, but being able to pivot as well.
Yeah. I kind of like this. It's almost, you should leave your agenda outside of the doors before you enter the conversation. And I think it's quite difficult because especially, we all have our goals and KPIs, or at least we're trying to then maximize the work that we do. But it really blinds you in a way as well, because the more structured you are, the more you're trying to follow it. Because, especially I'm assuming in large organizations, and we both come from quite large corporations in one way or another, you're still working with one person at a time. Yeah. You're speaking only with one person at a time when you're building that natural one-on-one relationship. And I'm thinking, at any point when I take the inputs, I'm always thinking, how is this going to help me achieve my KPI? Where really my KPI is, have I maximized the relationship that I could? Have I increased the value of my counterpart as best as I could? Because if I have this, and now if I speak externally, our customers will return because we are giving them. We're not just taking from them to maximize our KPIs. So I like this way of agility thinking because often, like you said, when we started to have this conversation, what are we going to be sharing with people today? There are a lot of things that you and I can be talking today about, and we have very limited time. So we might just really end up on 1, 2, 3. And not the other 15, but it really depends. How do you feel today? You've already had last week things that happened to you that have completely changed your perspective. You're now in a different group of stakeholders that are now influencing your thinking differently. You're seeing customers in a different way. Your peers are now different. So you're seeing completely different interactions. I like the thinking that the agility above all really allows you to just listen. I'm not rigid in my agenda. I'm listening to what you have to say, and then I'll respond.
Yeah, and you're right. Throughout all of the change, it does, again, still remain the same thing, right? The fuller my tank is, the more I can give to someone else. So it's understanding that longevity in these one-to-one interactions. And at the end of the day being the person people want to work with. Not at all costs, of course. If there are some extremes either which way, you don't want to be that person. But at the end of the day, especially when you're learning, and that humbleness of I am learning, still being that person people want to turn for advice to and want to be the person they work with, that's really what it boils down to, whichever stakeholder map. And that's exactly what you said when you're building the bridges. That is what's building the bridges, because at the end of the day, you want people to be able to say, hey, go speak with Karin about this issue.
In the beginning, when we started to speak of where we are in our careers, and you have to listen, or let's say in the beginning, you're more listening because you're just like a sponge and you're just taking everything in. I like to think that even when what you said now, even when you're later in your career, you might still have to unlearn a couple of things and relearn them. But I think what we might be forgetting sometimes is when we are speaking with people that are new in their career, or that are, let's say, even if you have a new customer on the other side, and they're not yet familiar with how things are usually running, I think that is often really the blessing in disguise that they don't see. Because what I don't want to say we're not doing enough, but what we might not be appreciating enough is this input of someone giving you the answer or asking the dumbest question in the room. And that is probably the biggest blessing that you can get, because you were thinking that this was so clear. How could this intern ask me a question that is not even marketing related? Well, then, is it really, am I just thinking rigid? Because that is something that's not unclear to one person. It might be unclear to all the future talents looking to build their careers in this world. So I'm going back to when you said, go speak to Karin on that topic. I would like to also see more of us saying, go speak to this new person that joined, because they will have a completely different perspective. Yeah. And I think just building talents and taking from like our peers, again, internally or externally, what they have different, and pour your bucket onto them and allow them to grow this different branch out, because you need this. You don't need 10 Natashas and you don't need 10 Karins. The world has plenty of that.
Yeah, I think also it's the new people that are still the most flexible in changing or even unlearning and challenging what we have been doing. And let's be honest, in my prior role, I was there 3 years. There's nothing more humbling than someone asking you a question which seemed quite obvious, but then asking the follow-up question and you can no longer give an answer. You then realize, actually, it's not even clear to me. Understanding, okay, I'm going to admit at this point, it's also unclear. And that's how you find those gaps, right? Those gaps of, this is going to create, potentially worst case, create conflicts. But at the very least, it's going to create a slight amount of confusion, which, if I understand, your role across both of our industries is the biggest risk. Because at the end of the day, it's going to create a worse client experience. It's going to create a worse team dynamic. And it's going to create a lot more uncertainty in a day-to-day role. So it's, but it's tough to remain and admit, no, actually, I'm not going to be able to give that answer.
And it's perfectly fine. They usually teach you when you're even like a public speaking situation where you don't have an answer to say, that's a great question. I will get back to you on this one. And it's okay to say, I don't have it. I will get back to you on this one. Because I think, just picking up on what you said, it's one of the worst things that you can do is give the answer just to seem competent, and the answer is not good enough, because you're going to plant a seed in someone and they're going to then be limited with that thinking. And then you've either spread misinformation or kind of what you were referring to, confusion, which then kind of alludes to communication, right? We're back to, where do you and I cross over? But even further than that, where do everyone working in any industry cross over? And I think it really does boil down to communication. How can we build strong teams, relationships, if we can get this human effect? I'm fully transparent and authentic, and I will share with you what I know, but I will equally share with you what I don't know. So maybe that, don't come to me for these questions, I don't have them, but I'm an expert in ABC. So just kind of being this authentic, very transparent, able to open up and then admit, this is where I'm strong, this is where I'm not, but it's just going to make the communication much more easier. Because, I mean, I see it, you know, and I was approached by some peer women. It does still, unfortunately, happen more within women, or let's say within female audience. How do you create this authenticity that people listen to you as well? So it's a bit on the credibility, but also authenticity. And I really struggled to think, what is the answer? Because looking back at my journey, and not just the Trelleborg, but in general, it took me a while to get to the point where, you know, I will be very transparent and very honest. I will admit my faults equally as I will praise someone else, you know, because I'm not building myself up. I am building my team. And it's easy to become a little bit, how to say, disengaged, because we have these levels in our organizations, and we often think the only way to get up is to climb yourself up on your ladder. But I really, you know, I'm really liking the idea, and maybe it comes with also our younger generations. We like to work because of the people that we work with. It's no longer the company or let's say the label you would have on your CV, but am I inspired? Am I doing something better today when I go to work? Yeah. Now, how do I communicate with my people to make sure that they're also engaged? Yeah. Because if they're disengaged, no matter what I do, I can't pull the weight by myself. So how do we become more effective in communication?
Well, you know, what you just said, and I think it is still a reality. I think it's so important being authentically yourself, because it feels, I mean, it's 8 hours of our day, plus minus, that we're working every single day. It's a big chunk of our day that we're using energy for this. And when you're doing it inauthentically, it just costs more energy when you're working against your natural instincts. And of course, there's a difference between, you know, me corporately, me privately, but still there shouldn't be too many forced habits. And I think the reality when you go into the female audience piece, and then I'll go to the tips and tricks, the female audience piece, it's true. I think it feels, or the feedback I get as well when I've been approached for advice, or when I've also spoken with, you know, other mentors, coaches, it feels, and it shouldn't, but it does feel difficult being vulnerable, depending which industry you're with, depending how, you know, and at Google, we're very fortunate, the gender balance is, you know, very high, but just realizing, you know, me showing this vulnerability is still going to work with the gender I'm, you know, representing in this room. And I think that was a very difficult journey at the beginning, but the main reason being, one of the first pieces of advice I got, no matter who you are, you need really good sponsors. When you're not in the room, you need people that are really going to fight your case, that are going to really underline, hey, Natasha's great. But the first sponsor that I neglected was my own, right? It felt so, and it still feels unnatural, writing my own CV, selling myself, and really standing confidently and saying, you know, this is what I'm known for. These are my strengths. Yeah. And it's what you said as well, you know, and so the first tips and tricks was, honestly, the literature around all of this on how to be your own biggest fan, your own biggest sponsor, but also some of the workshops. I Am Remarkable is one that's also run externally to Google, but just learning to stand up for yourself is also at the same time learning to be humble, right? Because you're understanding, no, I'm known for these key strengths. These are not mine, as you said. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the first tips and tricks, learning to really understand your own strengths, standing up for yourself, because no one's going to sponsor you if you're not, you know, sponsoring yourself is the reality. But that was my cliche answer. If what's your tips and tricks?
Well, you know, actually, just to piggyback on that one, and that was before knowing you and knowing anyone else at Google as well. I actually attended I'm Remarkable workshop when I was in Spain. And I thought it is only for women. It is, I mean, as it is, I think the concept set up today is for women, right?
And underrepresented groups in general.
Underrepresented groups. Okay, thanks for the correction. It's probably one of the things that I would say is, you know, it's a little bit of a balance now, I'm thinking, because I have to be my biggest advocate. But if I'm in the environment that, I don't want to say it's pulling me down, it's very difficult to stand up. And that's why I think, you being in a company that has a very strong gender balance, also now in Trelleborg, it's something that it's on top of our agendas to bring but not just gender, it's really the diversity balance across. Because the moment I recognize that there are different people, I'm not trying to fit the one mold. I am, again, not unapologetically myself. I think it is still within the boundaries of respect that we have to be speaking with each other. But as I kind of strip off my layers and I allow myself to be vulnerable, admit what I'm good at, and equally admit what I'm not good at. And I think that's something where I don't know what or as I'm looking around, people are struggling the most with. I think it's quite difficult to admit what we don't do well. Yeah. And this is where it's tricky. But what I kind of, when I'm looking at tips and tricks to establish this effective and efficient communication, and if you can narrow down and have this respect, and I come from the point where I have the best interest in you as a human, then almost nothing can go wrong, as much as you can boil down and get your key message across first. Yeah. And I think this is even looking at how we do marketing, right? We're trying to build large stories where what is the average span of attention today when people are on social media and websites? You kind of need the key, the core, the essence fast and instantly.
The time element is just so crucial because, even just, I think, I can't remember which Harvard Business Review article I was reading, but you realize so late throughout your day or throughout your week at how much non-screen time you've had, right? Because I realize now as I'm talking to you, obviously I'm looking at you, but it's a screen ultimately. I have my phone next to me, and those moments of I can actually just leave my computer, my laptop, get up and have a break, like that time element is for sure crucial. The second piece, I think, is that feedback piece. And you're right, that's exactly why marketing does focus groups or, test trial runs, is to get that feedback from the market. What's our product? What do we need to change? What's our approach? What do we need to change? Yeah. Same way as humans, we only really realize our gaps when we get that feedback. But I think that's such an interesting piece because it's also a key skill to allow people to give you feedback, right? To be open enough and ask for the whichever way sandwich 2x2 feedback in a respectful manner, but get feedback candidly and often enough from peers and not just, people you'd be naturally getting feedback with, your management chain, for example. And that's really something that, even within a company like Google that does encourage feedback, or, an industry that moves so quickly, marketing or sales, and the same in, your role, it still boils down to, is someone going to trust that if they give me constructive feedback, A, I value it, and B, there's no negative effect on them. And that's the fascinating piece. And I know we pre-discussed that whether we were going to go this way or not, but I think the element that one can't forget here is, number one, of women or underrepresented groups, but also the cultural difference. At the end of the day, it's still people living together. But I can assure you, when my parents, coming from the UK, moved to Germany, there's a whole different feedback culture. And in the business sense, I think in the most positive way, right? Like for German clients, you will know when you've done a bad job immediately.
Yeah.
At the end of the meeting, if you ask the question, hey, did everyone get what they came here for today? You will get the answer no if they didn't, right? So it speeds it up, but it's also understanding from who, which cultural background, which upbringing, can I expect feedback at what speed and with background,
Yeah. It almost circles it back to how we were speaking before on authenticity, but also listening, right? Am I actually willing to receive feedback? Because we often speak about, tell me, I want to know, give me feedback, but am I actually ready to hear it? And then how it's delivered, it's something we don't have obviously influence on. Yeah. I think most people, again, I would go back to, they don't have the tools to effectively and efficiently deliver some of the communication. But it usually comes from a good place of mind, right? When you get feedback, someone took the time to convey to you what worked or what didn't work or what you can do better. So I'm thinking, even if you get this one, and I know I don't want to say German, but one person that's very direct in the room, they will say, no, I didn't get what I came here for. That's probably the best thing that you can get, because you directly know, wow, this one person I have to focus on, rather than getting, let's say, a cushioned answer and feedback to say, yes, I did, all good. This person will go back, be disengaged, not motivated to continue, their bucket will not be full, and they will continue to operate at somewhat minimum, and they won't get the full value of Natasha that they could.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, go.
No, go ahead.
I think that ties back to the tips and tricks, actually. As you were saying that, it was kind of a little light bulb moment for me there, because you're right. Admitting when you don't know the answer is just as important as admitting, actually, I haven't fully understood, or I haven't got the information I need. That's the same way in building that, understanding of weaknesses. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, for me also, it almost ties it all. We often speak of this human effect, and how do we build the strongest relationships with people let's just leave it at people for now. And I think right, we listen, we get the feedback, we get the inputs, and then we respond with as tailored communication as we can, right? We leave our agenda outside. I wanted to sell you these 3 things or convey these 3 messages, but what your pain is something completely different. I might need to engage someone else. And I think this kind of leads me to, we have to be personalizing our communication, right? I mean, we often hear of, at least within marketing, we have personalized campaigns. You get emails where it's, hey, Natasha, I saw you were on this website looking for these shoes. They're like, wow, yes, I was. This is exactly what I needed. So you shorten that cycle. You get directly to what Natasha's interest is, and you convey to her, you kind of match my need with your need. And I think with that, personalization quite key. But how we get to there, I'm thinking, you identify the need, you have a very direct communication, because we don't have the time anymore to be beating around. I would rather break it into 10 and find my niches for all of the 10, because this is how we can maximize. But I think I would like to kind of leave it with this agility, because it was really the word that kind of stuck with me. I might have 10 things that I know I'm trying to push the agenda on, but the market might be looking for 2 more that I don't have on my plate today. And me admitting internally, me and as a company, we're not, let's say, meeting and satisfying these needs today, but they are in the market and we could.
I think at a market level, that agility is, more crucial now than it ever was potentially. I think the quickest moments of agility we've seen was the transition into a pandemic and the transition back out of a pandemic, just because everyone's needs changed so quickly.
Yeah.
Also highlighted, and you're right, ending on that skill of your own personal agility as well. Your day-to-day life is going to become so much easier when you're not rigid and I know what I'm going to be doing day in, day out. I know some days will change. I know some relationships will change. And just that mental capacity of accepting a slight level of uncertainty, or here we say thriving in ambiguity. It's so true. You need to be able to work in and around that change to allow or to have a huge market agility, I think.
I like this.
Agility, I think a good word to end on as well. A good word to tie in together. And I think on the topic of agility, this, was a fascinating conversation, the different ways we went. And I think you're right. The best way to sum it up was the human effect across these industries.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Natasha, for joining me for our first coffee chat podcast, however we want to brand it. I'm sure there will be more, maybe not on the camera, but I know that there will at least be.
I'm sure we'll follow up. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing and inspiring.